Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. The last game in the Phase-On trilogy, Corruption was released in 2007 for the Nintendo Wii. It takes full advantage of the motion controls of the system and approaches the story in a more cinematic way. Let's see if this was a fitting ending to the original Prime Trilogy. The game looks beautiful and everything looks clearer and more varied. Each of the worlds looks pretty different from each other and has its own details and characteristics. They are actually so nice that it's become a lot easier to see all the little things that could lead you to items or secret entrances without nearly as much effort as before. The music once again is pretty atmospheric and sometimes you won't even notice it's there since it connects so well with the environment and the situations. Sound effects are mostly what we've seen in the previous games, simple but satisfying. This game actually has quite a few characters speaking and the voices are pretty clear. Probably not the best when it comes to voice acting, but serviceable and at least not cringe-worthy. I also need to mention that the interface and especially the maps are clearer and easier to use. I've always had problems with 3D maps, but I had almost zero problems in this game. The beginning is a little slow with all the talking, walking and analyzing that happens, but it's okay. It may feel like it's too much, but that's only cause it's a lot compared to the rest of the series, but if you analyze the events in general terms, it's just enough exposition to show what they want to show, and they don't really overdo it. Don't worry though, things go back to what you'd expect soon enough. By the time you arrive in your first real planet, direct exposition won't happen much anymore, and we'll be back to getting information from the environment. What's more, the stories in each planet are pretty interesting if you take the time to find and read the data logs, so nothing was lost. There are other sections where characters appear and speak a bit, but they are short and harmless. The most common voice you'll hear is an AI that gives you tips on where to go from time to time, but don't worry, at least you won't repeat things unless you restart the game. All of these things though cause you to feel less isolated than in other Metroid titles, which some people might dislike, but I think the change is minor enough in the name of some world building and progress. More could have been done with the other characters, but I guess the developers were a bit afraid of making them too important and making fans angry. The game seems to have fixed most of the rough edges previous 3D games had. Combat is a lot faster and more satisfying, probably because there are more enemies and they die pretty fast. Boss fights are also faster and they don't require you to repeat things too many times. Hyper mode is the innovation of the game and it's just okay, but at least it's easy and fast to use. Hold the plus button and the mode activates, taking one energy tank, hold it again and it deactivates and returns you the health that's left. Sometimes the mode gets corrupted and you need to empty your weapon fast or you die. You also get variation for hyper mode for missiles, grapple lasso and morph ball, but I only use them to open doors and things for the most part. You have to use the hyper beam a bit too often, but it's not as annoying as something like the overuse of the morph ball in Echoes for example, and if anything, it makes things faster, increasing the pace of the game. On other things, I really like that you start with things like the double jump and morph ball plus bombs, and you never lose them. This greatly helps with the initial sense of mobility and control. Not so sure about using motion controls for things like opening doors. It's a bit annoying at the beginning, but I guess that once you get used to it, it's okay. Just don't stop aiming at the screen and it will work without a hitch. Grapple is pretty cool though, especially in combat. Many people will dislike having to use motion controls, but I can't really blame a Wii game for having motion controls, right? It's like blaming a NES game for having 8-bit graphics. Also, they are probably the best motion controls I've had the chance to play with, and I think that says something. And believe me, I have a distaste for motion controls as most people do. The game mostly happens in 3 planets that are subdivided into smaller separated areas that you can fly to in your ship. It makes things a bit more linear, but I think it's a great idea since it makes revisiting areas less of a chore since you don't need to go through unwanted sections, and it also makes things less confusing in general. It also makes more sense to travel in a ship through different regions than having a volcano, a tundra and a forest being an elevator away. And let's be honest, does it really make a difference to have everything connected directly? Hardly, at least from a gameplay perspective. I don't think having to jump into your ship to go to different places is much different than getting into an elevator to go to different areas. It just eliminates unnecessary padding. Also, it's not like there aren't shortcuts and interconnected areas within the planets. Things are just more neatly divided. I also need to mention that having different things to do in each planet to progress, and surprisingly the motion controls, help the game feel more varied and less repetitive than its brethren. No more collecting 3 keys in each area to move on. What really surprised me was that there is a room where you can send satellites and actually make dots appear in the places in your map where you're missing items. Not necessary really, but it helps to avoid getting frustrated looking for a couple of final items you've missed. Speaking of items, the final and by now classical hunt for keys is way simpler, and once the time arrived, I was only missing a couple of the items I needed. A few more painless trips around the planets and I was done. I didn't even need all of them, only 5. The rest are only needed to get some more items, so if you hate the hunt for this, you probably won't even have to do it, since you should be able to get that number just by paying a little attention while advancing. I don't think finding things is as easy or linear as people say though. Sure, it's more straightforward and I found more things without having to pass through the same places innumerable times, but as I mentioned before, I think that's because things look better and sharper, which makes detecting things easier. Also, if you add to this the system to add dots where items are missing, and the option to change the color of the rooms that are cleared in your map, then of course things will seem easier. Also, not the best metric, but I checked the number of rooms in each Prime game, and Corruption only has like 25 rooms less than the original Prime, which is the highest with 275, so it's not like it's much shorter either. The pace is just faster and the connections between rooms are less confusing, so you won't spend as much time looking for the correct way to go. All of this sounds to me more like good game design than oversimplification. Finally, I need to mention that enemies don't close door on you when exploring old areas, which is just wonderful. The Visos are actually cool to use since you don't need to be switching all the time, and one actually allows you to do headshots, which is pretty cool. And also, there is some noticeable loading when trying to open doors leading to big areas. A wonderful game that has refined all of the rough edges that the previous games had. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call it the best Metroid game since it breaks a lot of the traditions and expectations fans have of the series, like the huge interconnected maps, a total sense of isolation, and many things being kind of cryptic and confusing to add to this feeling. But, as a game and on its own merits, it is certainly the most plain fun and accessible game in the Prime series, a true gem that everyone who doesn't mind motion controls and things being a little different from the series should enjoy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment and subscribe. You can expect games from a variety of genres in the future. See you next time.